One bullet just like about coordinating the itinerary from the temporary one. What do you mean?
I can explain what I mean.
I mean, it would have been good, like we talked about these things before, because I just involved in it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, I don't know, like, what's the plan of your.
It was a very loose plan, just to give people heads up that we'll.
I think the plan is to remove the temporary one, right?
Yeah, sure, but we would need to populate the
real one.
The real ones, and we'll be coordinating, i.e., taking it to the list after this meeting and reaching out to people.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I think there's the process of, like, we cannot just send all of this, like, we have to do the RAM registration and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But now I understand. So
yes.
I was a bit,
yeah, it was kind of just trying to do this. That's just the kind of point. Yeah. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the first in-person Quic meeting I've chaired, so bear with me. I have no excuse for first day technology woes. Apparently we have a bit of an AV issue with the screen behind me, in terms of that would be running Meet Echo, visualization of what's happening. But don't worry, we'll live on. In case anyone in the room hasn't yet done it, there was a QR code to scan on the way in. That would cover the blue sheets, and that would allow you to participate. So we'll be running the queue via the website/application that QR code would load. So if you would like to get onto the microphone while you're in the room, please use that tool. Similarly, for remote participants, you'll be familiar with using the Meet Echo tool to participate in terms of sharing your microphone and entering the queue and so on and so forth. So without further ado, let's get on with some administrivia and some chair slides. I'm sharing. How do I forward the slide? There we go. The Notewell. So if you're not familiar with the Notewell, we are on our second day, so I'd hope some of you would have seen this yesterday. The Notewell is a reminder of the policies in effect on various topics such as patents and code of conduct. So please do just go and follow the links and read up on this and understand how your contributions on participation in the IETF follow processes and policies. In addition to that, just like last time, we'd like to draw specific attention to our code of conduct and the expectations for how IETF participants extend respect and courtesy to their colleagues at all time. Again, please familiarize yourself with these, and if there are any issues that you encounter with code of conduct, the chairs, the ADs, the ombuds team are here, so please reach out to us. We have a note taker. Brian has volunteered. Thank you very much. As always, if there's anyone who would like to dive into the notes app and help him, that would be brilliant. We do need well, the blue sheet's already handled. That's good. We would like a Java scribe. Would anyone like to volunteer? David, thank you very much. We've covered the tool. These slides are taken from the last time around, so some of the icons might have changed. It doesn't look that way to me. So again, I would hope some of you are familiar, but if not, you can always use your intuition. Oops, wrong link to the agenda. There we go, the obvious error. We are at IETF 113. Please ignore that link. That's my fault, but the rough order of events is listed here anyway. we're going to do some chair updates, trying to keep it brief. You know, as we've completed Quick Vision 1, it kind of people maybe not following the working group so closely, so we just want to give you an idea of what's happened since last time. Then we'll get into the adopted working group items, so we'll cover version negotiation, quick load balancing, Quic v2, onto multipath and Qlog. Then we have one additional item to talk about, zero RTT BDP. Would anyone like to bash that agenda? Nope, okay. So brief update since last meeting, the multipath document was adopted into the working group, which is good. Work is underway there. We'll hear from Miria later about what's been happening, what issues there are to resolve, etc. The HP3 and QPAC drafts entered Auth48 after about a year of purgatory. So we're making some progress there. The datagram draft entered Auth48 yesterday, just as we were on the train to somewhere. So we'll be following with an update to the list about how we're going to manage Auth48 comments around this time, but should be nothing out of the ordinary in terms of our working group GitHub flow of issues and resolutions. So look out for that. The ops drafts, the applicability and manageability draft completed IETF last call. We're at 0 GitHub issues right now. So thank you for all the reviewers from the various areas and for the editors in responding to those issues. I think we're in a good place, and we will be working with Zarhead to progress that onto the next stage. And the greasebit document is due a Shepherd write-up from me, so that's on me, and that'll be coming soon, Zarhead. So just look out for that one. Related work. We had mask yesterday, which was good. We have web transport on Thursday, which I hope will be good. And there is a media over Quic BOF session on Wednesday morning, so tomorrow this time, that you might want to look out for. I won't go into any more details there. So I have 2 slides that I would like to talk about general working group business. The first one should be fairly straightforward. But for those who maybe don't know, the data tracker holds both our charter and our list of milestones. The data tracker allows, generally speaking, milestones to have dates or no dates. You can't mix them, but you can go inside and toggle between the two. Currently, the Quic working group uses milestones with dates, and all of the milestones are along the lines of submit draft so-and-so to the IESG. If anyone looks at those, they're all past due. And we're also missing some milestones for the documents we've adopted since that happened. We can blame COVID for that, but I think what's kind of fun from my perspective is no one seems to have complained about this, and that we're making good progress. Spencer's in the queue. Okay, this slide. Okay. As far as we're concerned, we're keeping active and everything's going along okay. So none of this is unique to the Quic working group as far as I can tell. I wanted to do some data-driven analysis. So I scraped the data tracker API and gathered some information and started a thread on the working group chair's mailing list. As far as I could tell, at the point in time I did this, there was 123 working groups. 4 of them used non-dated milestones and the rest used dated. Of those dated milestones, over 500, there were 500 and 400 odd of those were late. So that's about 80%. And the median value was 2.5 years. So my interpretation is they're pretty pointless. Having goals in general is good, and we should strive to keep on top of the work that's happening here and keep it churning along, and we do see that. So for the Quic working group, the proposal would be to switch away from these dated milestones, which adds some work for us to decide what the date should be and then what it should be when we don't hit that because of various reasons. But the order of presentation of that list would be the anticipated sequence of our documents. So see Spencer in the queue. Is anyone else? And then David after him. Please go ahead, Spencer.
Yeah, thank you. So Spencer Dawkins, and I applaud the discussions that are happening everywhere in the IETF about that we don't lie to ourselves. But when we stop lying to ourselves and start telling the truth, people will notice that something happened. The people in the IETF will adjust, but I would suggest you all to be very clear in what you're doing and why. And I would ask the working group to consider, or the chairs to consider, dropping a liaison message to people who've already interacted with the Quic working group from other SDOs and explain to them what is happening and why, and that we all think it's a good thing, and that this is the way, this is reality for the last however long the Quic working group has been in existence anyway, and now they can tell what we're actually doing. But it seems like to me that without that, having the dates suddenly disappear completely would send the message that we have no idea how long this is going to take, which may be true, and you might as well go ahead and try to do stuff that's in scope of this working group yourself in another SDO. And that would be a train wreck. So like I say, I know you all will do the right thing, whatever that is, but that would be my input into your consideration to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer. We've captured some notes there, so we'll take that into consideration. David, please.
David Skenazy, Quic enthusiast. Sure, this is between the chairs and the AD. Please just decide, like, let's move on. We trust you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, and I'll just try to hammer this through. For anyone that may have been working with the Quic drafts while we were still in development before our C9000 or before they got the instructions to the IANA team to construct some tables, we had something called the temporary IANA table, which is a wiki page on the base drafts repo. This was intended to capture use of Quic and HP3 extension points before those tables were created so that we could just coordinate amongst the community and avoid nasty collisions. That's covered stuff like Quic versions, transport parameters, settings, frame types, error codes, and so on. And it's there, and we thank people who have taken the effort to go and register the values there. However, the IANA tables now exist, and we would encourage people strongly to use the actual tables that they should be doing, using the established IANA procedures in the relevant Quic or HTTP3 documents. Saying that, we do have a bunch of values in the temporary IANA table, and we want to get those into the proper ones as well. So we just wanted to give people a heads up of what's going to be happening, and not effectively archiving that temporary table, locking it, and then assisting with the various responsible parties, follow the due process to get everything into the full official tables. So there's no action immediately required from anyone, but just keep an eye out on the list or for any direct contact that might be coming from the chairs, and please assist us in doing the right thing. And that is the end of the chair slides. I see no one in the queue, and I think we're good to proceed on to the first agenda item. Let me switch slide deck.
Thank you, Lucas. My name is David Skenazy. I'm a Quic enthusiast. And let's talk about quick version negotiation. Next slide, please. So, I've had this slide for, I don't forget how many years now, and I just keep adding lines and then it's starting to not fit. But conceptually, we've been doing VN for a while. Used to be in Google Quic, it got added to IETF Quic, we split it out to its own draft. We redesigned it as a working group, and we've kind of landed on something that everyone likes, or rather that no one dislikes. And over the course of the last almost year, we've done quite a bit of editorial work. That's where the document was quite lacking. But we've kind of gotten it in what I think to be a decent shape between the editors. Next slide, please. Skip that one. Thank you. We had one question, which is in a way editorial, but kind of fundamentally changes quite a bit how we see the like a lot of the text, and Ecker and I didn't quite agree on it, so we thought that's great, we can bike shed this with the working group. And it's on like the definition of the term compatible version negotiation from the draft. The way I personally had been thinking about it, you would have, when you use the same version that the client offered, that would just be using that version. And compatible version negotiation would be when you use that feature to upgrade from one to another. Ecker's coming at it more from like the TLS side of things, where when you thanks, Martin. When you look at the wow, lost my train of thought. It's early here. When you actually stick to that version, that's also compatible version negotiation. You just negotiated the first version that was offered by the client. So do folks have thoughts here? It kind of, the reason we're bringing it is like it editorially changes kind of a lot of the document in terms of how we think about it. And these are terms that'll stick with us for a while. And Ecker, if you want to add something, hop on. But otherwise, yeah, I'm opening up to the floor. Does anyone care?
We can't hear you, Echo.
You're marked as unmuted, but we cannot hear you. We can't hear Martin. No, Martin. Martin, just try to thing is if the like audio is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is me.
Okay, we can hear you, MT. So the problem is on your end, Ecker. Maybe microphones don't work at 2 a.m. in California. Nope.
Try turning it off and on again.
Let's take MT first while Ecker tries that. Maybe switch microphone, or I don't know. MT, go ahead.
So Ecker's right. You're wrong. This is version negotiation, even if you pick the same thing. It's a lot cleaner that way. Then you don't have to think about it too much. The other thing was a version is always compatible with itself, is the other way to think about it.
That works for me. All right, proposal, we actually do what Ecker wants. If you don't like that, please come to the mic now. And I'm the Jabber scribe, so can someone just double check that there's not too much happening in the Jabber? All right, then next slide, please. So that was the last issue. We're going to do some editorial work on this to clean it up. Ecker and I are meeting next week to do that. But we're pretty much done. We have some reasonable amount of implementation experience. We don't have too much deployment with compatible VN right now. But we think this is ready. And kind of the question on where we proceed is, do we want to tie the progression and timeline of this draft to what we're doing in Quic V2, which is kind of the first way we have to really exercise compatible VN? Or do we just want to move this forward, or do working group last call and then park it? What do people think? Well, especially the chairs.
No strong opinions from chairs right now.
It's too early for strong opinions.
As
Please state your name at the microphone.
oh, okay, sorry, Martin Duke, Google, and V2 author, and I think V2 is waiting for you, so it will not be a blocking thing, as well. I'll talk about in like the next presentation.
All right, then barring like we're going to do a bit of editorial work in the coming week. After that, I think we probably want to request working group last call then.
Okay, thank you. We had Martin in the queue.
Oh, sorry. There's MT back in the queue.
Yeah, so having implemented both of these, I think that technically they are good. I think that the version negotiation draft is a bit rough editorially, and so I hope to get a little bit of time to see what you and Eka manage to put together next week. I think there's some ordering things and some terminology stuff that's a little bit shaky, but it's technically sound. I've implemented it. I've implemented V2. They both interop with, I think, 3 or 4 other implementations, and I think we're deploying it. So, whoops.
Cool. Quick question, MT. You had a few very good editorial issues that you filed on the draft. We resolved these like right before the draft deadline and submitted a new one that hopefully addresses those. Are you referring to the one before, or do you think we need like that? It's still a bit rough with the latest one.
Oh, I only read it last week. I'll have another look. Yep.
Thanks. And we're happy to do that. Do you think that we're okay to move forward to working group last call, and then after we address some of the editorial things and address more editorial things after working group last call, or?
Let me take another look. But if the editorial state was as it was when I last saw it, I'd like to see that work done before working group last call. There's a good chance that somebody could get messed up in that process.
Sounds good. When you take a look at that, please follow issues with specifics if you have them. Thanks.
Yeah.
Cool. Ecker's next in the queue.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I can explain what happened later. It's not good. Anyway, I think if we're going to make substantial editorial changes, let's just do them and then do working group last call. Because otherwise we'll have to do working group last call again. So.
Okay, that makes sense. All right.
Okay.
That's it on quick version negotiation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, David. We've made some time up there, which is great. That's appreciated. Which slide would you like to start with?
V2.
V2. Okay.
So does this work with the mask? All right, sweet. Next slide. So the closely related V2 draft, just for any of you who were not paying attention, this has a few purposes. It is not adding any features to Quic. It is not fixing anything about Quic version 1. It is an effort to grease the version field, to have a target for this VN thing that David and Ecker have been working on. And also, just while we have the Quic brain trust together, kind of develop a template for what a new version should look like and give people kind of an example to follow when they do Quic versions that actually add value. Next slide. Actually, before I get to this, there isn't much in the way of open issues. There's mainly just an editorial thing about what goes in the VN draft versus what goes in the V2 draft. So David and I are playing hot potato on a couple issues, but I think these can go together probably to working group last call pretty soon. We have pretty good interop with V2. There's one issue that might be contentious. We had a few people who felt strongly discuss it offline, but ALPN is the one thing. So after a bit of wrangling, we've decided that V2 should use the H3 Alpin rather than H3 dash something. And of course for DOQ and for MOC or MOC or whatever it's called, same thing. Next slide. So the draft currently says that yes, all these ALPNs apply. This has, so there's a few reasons. Number one, since compatible version negotiation, there's not a lot of cost to messing up, to using sort of the incorrect version. Certainly the case, we don't anticipate a lot of V2 only servers and clients out there. As a practical matter, some implementations would be complicated by having to revise the ALPN in use. As I talked about a couple IETFs ago, if we have lots of versions and lots of ALPNs, then the registry sort of explodes, and that's kind of a bad thing to do to the ALPN registry for just on behalf of Quic. And finally, as a deployment issue, obviously a lot of H3 things are tied pretty closely to the Quic implementation, but in principle, if you have an abstract Quic implementation with an API, the application should be providing an ALPN to provide to use in the connection. And if you're trying to roll out new Quic versions or deprecate older Quic versions in a Quic implementation, then you would then have to change all the applications, and that sounds unhappy. So for all these reasons, this is where we've landed. And I'd like to open the floor if people have a big problem with that, or a small problem with that.
Okay, we have Mike Bishop in the queue. Mike, go ahead.
Waiting to see if audio is going through. All right. So to be clear, I'm not coming to the queue because I have a problem with it. I think this is the right call. I think this is the wrong draft. This needs to be in version negotiation. And you can mention it here too, but I think version negotiation needs to talk about ALPN selection across versions and when you can share them and when you can't.
Okay, I will say that in terms of our forging a consensus, we sort of punted the issue of incompatible versions. I think that this logic should apply to incompatible versions, but I'm not sure that is a universal sentiment. The current sort of pattern that we're developing here is that if you are doing a new version draft, you should essentially inventory all the existing ALPNs and say if they work. Conversely, if you're doing a new, if you're registering a new Quic ALPN, you should really inventory all the existing Quic versions and sort of say if they work. And then ultimately, if it becomes unmanageable, we can have a registry, but I don't think we're anywhere near that point yet.
Yeah, I have a feeling, unmanageable or not, there are eventually going to be either versions or protocols that don't do that work. And we just need to write down somewhere what happens when you don't know whether it's supposed to be compatible. And probably VN is the right place.
What's that, David?
David Skenazy. What to do when they're not compatible is already in the VN draft, Mike, or did I misunderstand what you were saying?
Talk about ALPN, which I don't think is mentioned in the VN draft.
What to do when you're not sure whether the ALPN is compatible with the version. And I think the answer is don't use it.
Well, so I mean, we've overloaded the word compatible, which is a problem. So yes. The compatible version, incompatible version is referring to the pain of version negotiation. That's the context I was using it in. The other issue is are the features of the particular Quic version usable with the application, which is a different question. And that is the question that needs to be addressed in each version or in each draft that either proposes a new version or registers a new ALPN.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, ideally we have some concept of upper layer feature compatibility, but how do you quantify that?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to write that down either.
Yeah.
I have some good boilerplate, I think, in the V2 draft that says this is the same, so it should be fine. And I'm going to add something about DOQ since DOQ has essentially shipped. Okay, so David.
Oh, I'm already here. Great. I want to add to a few of these things because So first off, I don't really believe that there is a notion of, I don't know if this application layer protocol works over this transport. Like any specification of an application layer protocol will tell you what transport it runs on. And if it's another transport, it just doesn't work, period. Unless you have some reason to believe it does. And we're not gonna, this isn't the TAPS working group. We're not gonna mix and match things and hope for the best. Sorry. But no, so going into this a bit more, this is quite a bit of a mess. And the fundamental reason why this is such a mess is that, and obviously this is obvious in hindsight, wasn't at the time, we really messed up alt service. When we did alt service, we used ALPN tokens, whereas that's not what we should have used. We should have used a combination of ALPN and the entire transport stack underneath, because when you go to another service, that is the information you need to know. So let's say I connect to this website and it tells me it's accessible over HTTP3. I need to know what quick version I send an initial at. And if we are just talking about ALPN here, it makes sense to reuse the H3 ALPN for Quick V1 or Quick V2, because the ALPN is only makes sense only in the scope of an underlying version whose handshake you're doing. And that way you can go up to the next thing. But when you're doing alt service, all this completely falls apart. So
you're segueing nicely into, I think, what is the next slide? If that will work. Lucas?
This is the next slide.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Right. So Lucas and I have proposed the draft, which is essentially adding an alt service parameter that tells you what the quick version is, which will solve the problem for H3 if people support it. We will also extend that to service B once we get through a couple draft versions under our belt. So this is sort of our long-term solution to solve the problem that you're describing. Whether or not people will take it up is out of our control, but that's what we have.
So I see the queue is closed, so I'm going to go sit down, but and let MT and Ecker chime in. But I think this is really important. I really believe that we cannot move Quick V2 forward and kick this can down the road. I personally believe that we need to solve this and stop just writing more things. Like there's no rush whatsoever to deploying Quick V2. No one's waiting on it. And I would like to see this solved, because if we ship Quick V2 and then we realize that your draft doesn't work out, then we've made yet a bigger mess for ourselves.
Thanks, David. Martin Thompson, please.
Just waiting on audio. So I put it in the, and I'll probably read this out. Anything that's compatible with Quick, both on a version negotiation basis and a feature basis, is probably okay to use the same ALPN. I think we'll have to word that a little bit more precisely. I think you need a strict or a superset of the features that the protocol was using, which means that, for instance, if you define a new version of Quick that only does streams and doesn't do datagrams, it would still be okay for HTTP, probably, maybe, depending on all this WebSocket stuff. But that's the sort of idea that we're going to need to, we would want to write down. I don't think it works if you lose features in the transport, and I don't think it works if you lose compatible version upgrades, because then you have performance problems. And that's part of the reason why we're talking about the alt service thing. I think that's primarily why we're talking about the alt service thing, because if we're just doing LPNs and didn't care too much about it, we could do version negotiation, right? In that case. So I think everyone else here on the chat has been saying we should add it to the VN draft, not the Quick V2 draft, and I agree with that.
We're going to let David respond quickly to that, just as the VN author.
Sorry, very quickly. The quick version negotiation draft isn't specific to any quick version, obviously. So it operates at the level of the quick invariants. The quick invariants don't have a notion of ALPN because the quick invariants don't have a notion of TLS. You can have a quick version that's based on noise or what have you. So that is yet another reason why this is a mess.
That's true, but we also include a whole bunch of advice in there about what to do with retries, what to do with a bunch of other things. Zero RTT, I think it was as well. So I think probably what we can do is put another one of those subheadings under that section and say, what do you do with ALPN in the case that you have it? I think that's the right thing to do here. I don't think this is a property of V2. I think this is a property of VN.
I guess the question is what we have to write down right now. I think we've reached agreement that V2 will be specifically will be fine if we just reuse the ALPN, and we're establishing a pattern that people might follow, unless there's a reason not to. So maybe we can trust future standards writers to say, well, you know, this pattern is not working anymore, and so we should do something else. But if I mean, I'm not going to. If we want to put it in the VN draft, that's fine with me at least. But
I think, like with alt service, we can only do the best that we can with the information that we have at hand and the experience that we have. I suspect we do know something here, and that's based on the implementation experience that we have that suggests that you can use the same ALPN under the sort of narrow constraints that I described. And then maybe outside of that, it's for the reader, but, you know, work it out for yourself.
Okay. We're kind of out of time for this, but we'll let Eka respond. Well, speak quickly.
I think you can do that.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how quickly I'm going to speak since things have kind of backed up for a while. So I think a few points. First, I think like the worrying about like this is probably a little premature. Let's not. The situation like largely is going to be, I think okay, in the sense that, you know, trying to run like a situation where you actually have this much confusion about like A, the properties of the underlying protocol, and B, the properties of JLPNZ support seems like probably not like a great idea, and one we probably should not try to create. You know what application you're running. Again, it's not like you're ALPN switching between DOQ and H3, right? You know, that they sort of do this in like X now hello seems a little weird. I think what the David, you're right that this draft is agnostic about whether it's TLS or not, but it's hard to believe that any future thing we design isn't going to need some ALPN OID construct. And so even if that's carried in some entirely different way in the transport negotiation in the you know AIC protocol, it's going to have to go somewhere. I think you know ALPN was added to TLS for a reason. I think there is something that has to appear. I agree this has to appear if anywhere in the VN draft, but not in V2. I think what has to appear is that any exterior protocol negotiation signaling you do has to be done from scratch when you do incompatible VN, which is to say, so suppose, for instance, that you're you know, if you offered V1, you would have offered ALPN A, and when you offered V2, you offered ALPN A and B. Well, when you get a VN that forces you back to V1, you have to offer A and not A and B, because otherwise the attacker is able to force you in a posture of choosing a specific ALPN offer by doing a doing a VN. So I think and I haven't thought about it, but it's entirely possible there are other things like that have that property, and in every single case, things are done from scratch. Now, I think it does kind of imply that things are done from scratch, but I think it really has to be explicitly stated.
Thanks, Ecker. I think the concern that I'm pulling out of this, I mean, I think we're moving forward with V2 using the V1 ALPNs, but there's David's concern about maybe holding something up until this HP BIS draft matures a little bit. I'm not sure what would be held exactly between the VN draft and the V2 draft. I was hoping to ship both of them like soon, I think they're both essentially, I mean, the remaining concerns are editorial. So I think they're ready for working with last call unless we want to see how this alt service thing shakes out.
I don't think it's necessary to wait for, sorry, I should have responded. I don't think it's necessary to wait for that. I think the change that I propose to make to VN is straightforward. If any change is needed, I'll file a bug to like check for the change. Because I don't remember if we have any text about this. And I think that the V2 thing is fine. I don't think we need to do the alt service thing, frankly, at all, but like certainly not before we ship this.
Okay. And like I said, if you want to wander over to HTTP BIS and express some support for that, that would be helpful. Should we move on?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Next set of slides.
All right, now for something completely different, Quic LB.
Oops, nope, click the wrong button. One moment.
Okay, so when last we met, this thing had exploded through some scope creep into this multiplicity of config options, and there were like 3 different algorithms, and each algorithm had a completely different implementation and had completely different parameters with different limits. And there were not a lot of implementations. We not done any interop. The second problem is still a problem, but the first one has improved. Next slide. Okay, so now I got rid of all that, and there's just the one thing now. Basically, every connection ID looks like this. And it could be encrypted or not. And if it's the specific magic length where it can be a single block encryption and decryption because it's 17 bytes, then it is. Otherwise, you use this multi-pass thing. So this is much cleaner conceptually. I think it's a lot easier to understand, and it's much less code having implemented it both ways. Next slide. So these were sort of the last time. This is kind of the path forward I proposed for this. We did get a crypto review. We did make some changes. We just got another crypto review, which was a little less positive about what we had done. And so Christian and I are working through that. They kind of want to do more passes, which seems like a problem. So we're exploring that on how to fix that. I was going to delete the block cipher, but there was some pushback, and I think the new system where there's just a magic length where you use a block cipher cleans up a lot of complexity. It's like 10 lines of code. So I think we'll just leave it in. And I sent an email a few weeks ago about splitting the draft. So to remind you guys, there's this load balancer thing where we encode the server ID and a connection ID. And then there's like this mostly unrelated thing about offloading retry to some sort of service or hardware thing or whatever. That like is loosely under the theme of middlebox coordination, but otherwise there's no relationship at all. And so I think there was pretty strong support on the list to split those, and I've already got a PR for that. So unless somebody comes up to the mic and says this is a terrible idea, I'm probably going to commit that shortly after this. And then like from an editor, so there is, again, some more crypto review stuff to do, but like the design is getting pretty close to being done. I think what we really need is some interop and some deployment experience. I think Google has the intent of deploying this in the near to midterm, I'll say. So that will at least give us some experience to try to handle all the configuration and all that. I've gotten some bites from Ant Financial about their implementation. So maybe I would have thought by now we'd have more servers that supported this, but that seems not to have happened. So if you have a server implementation, I'd really appreciate some effort in this space. But I don't think we're a mile away from last call, but it needs a little more maturation before we get there.
We have Eka in the queue. Please go ahead.
Hi. So yes, I am just catching up to speed on the on this document. I did read the INRIA review, and it was quite concerning. I guess I don't think we should invent our own version of FFX in this working group, so either we should remove that section or we should replace it with FFX. But like it took an enormous long time to get FFX right, and a lot of real cryptographers, and so I think we should like I think it was like regrettable the extent to which we innovated, in cryptographically in doing sequence number encryption is about the limit of like what I'm willing to see IETF do without like a lot more crypto review than we seem to have.
I mean, the concern about f of x is 12 passes, which seems like a lot. And we have
encrypting cheaper, but like sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Well, so I mean, like we have a 0 pass option in this design still, where people don't encrypt at all. So it's like this is not a well-formed idea right now, but I'm thinking about possibly having some sort of configuration option where like you kind of can turn the knob on how well you're doing here in terms of like number of passes or something. But that's I got to go a couple rounds with Christian and the crypto review to figure out what we're doing there. But I understand your concern. Yeah.
I mean, I just like, yeah, I think just generally like the IETF used to do this kind of thing and like used to like freelance a lot on the crypto. And like we've really moved towards having like, as much as possible, having validated crypto that we have like high confidence in. And so like that, so to not have that seems like a real regression. And if the answer is we can't solve this problem, then we should throw up our hands and say we can't solve the problem and not, and like wait for the cryptographers to solve it for us rather than, it is possible there's something that can solve this problem given the more limited design space than FPE. But I think for us to like write into a proposed standard document, something which we like have like this little confidence in seems unfortunate.
Okay. I mean, I'm certainly open to the cryptographers like proposing something in the like sub 16 byte plain text space that meets the constraints that we have. I'm not married to this particular way of working, and I understand the concerns. I'm just that has not been forthcoming at this point, and I've not completely digested this latest review. So I need to huddle with Christian and figure out what we're going to do about it.
Perfect timing to ask Christian to come to the microphone.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for what Iker said. Okay, as in we should not invent stuff, and I actually insisted to have these crypto reviews to make sure that we were not out of the deep end. What is interesting is that one of the crypto review was really positive, and it is unclear that the in-area attack is actually important in the case that we have. But we can check that. I would much prefer to have something that is completely standard. And yeah, I mean, if people are okay with 12 passes, let's do 12 passes. But I must say that we have to discuss with the in-area folks to understand exactly what the implications are. And if it is to say don't do that, well, we won't do it. Or we should not do it.
Thank you, Christian. I don't see anyone else in the queue. You have one more slide, Martin.
Do I? Okay, sure.
But it is on the...
I've already forgotten. No, forget this.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about spoiling the documents.
No, it's good.
Unless somebody cares about spacing the documents, we don't want to talk about that.
No.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Which brings us on to the next agenda item, which is multipath.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Emilia Kulevan. I'm presenting for the author group here, and I hope my authors will just jump into the queue anytime they want to say something. And we go to the next slide. Yeah, so multipath draft was adopted earlier this year, and we submitted the 0.0 version. The 0.0 version had already a couple of editorial changes and clarifications and stuff compared to the individual draft. but no design changes, I believe. And then we submitted a new version just at the submission deadline, which also mainly had editorial changes, but like to a larger amount. Like we added some kind of overview section to make it easier to read. We had a couple of clarifications about how to use or like what's the relation to existing transport parameters. There was some clarifications about timeouts and so on. So this is technical stuff, but it was clarification stuff missing and not like supposed to be any kind of new design changes or anything like that. Yeah, look at the diff yourself if you want to know what the details are. Let's jump into the open issues. Next slide. We have a bunch of open issues in GitHub, and these are not all of them, but like there are also editorial ones, and we also have a bunch of open issues sorry, which are marked at kind of extension, because in this draft we really try to focus on the bare minimum to some extent, really what's needed to set up new paths and manage new paths. And so we have basically these 6 design issues which are currently open, and I would like to quickly run through them and see if we can make any progress. The biggest design issue is the last one here in the slide. That's a big question about using one or multiple packet number spaces. But if you look at the GitHub issue, we also made some progress there, had some good discussion, and maybe have a way forward. So let's see where we are. Yeah, let's start. Okay, this is an issue that has been around for a while. As I just said, when we took the existing multipass draft and merged them into this draft, we really tried to concentrate on the bare minimum. And so this part was existent in at least the Alibaba draft, but we didn't take it over. The function we're talking about here is to indicate to the other end that one of the parsers, or multiple of the parsers actually, should not be used at this point of time. So you just keep them as a backup. And that's a very typical scenario. You have like this handover scenario where you open one path on your Wi-Fi, one path on your cellular, and as long as you have good Wi-Fi connectivity, you don't want to use a cellular because it's more expensive. But you're the client, you have this knowledge, you're requesting data from the server, and the server doesn't know that. So you want to tell the server, don't use this path as long as you have a different path. That's the functionality. And that is related to packet scheduling and these kind of questions, which we declared as out of scope for the space draft. But this functionality seems to be very basic and very important and useful. So the question really is, do we want to add it back? As I said, it was there in the Alibaba draft. There was a frame called path status. We don't have that frame anymore. Path status had like a lot of information, not only this information, but this was like one piece of the information in there. And it's also a function that is part of multipass Quic, for example, because there's a bit in multipass Quic. So when multipass TCP, when multipass TCP was designed, they also decided this is an important function, they want to support it. So any opinions, should we re-edit? There's no PR yet, but like, I think, and we don't have to discuss about how we want to edit, just like getting some feedback if people think it's useful.
Yep, we have a few people joining the queue. So Spencer's up first. I'll just let him get to the physical microphone.
Yeah, this is Spencer Dawkins. So I think that this is really basic, and I think that almost everybody that has a cell phone that has Wi-Fi connectivity will find this, will find this useful sooner or later. So I think this is really basic. It could be in a separate extension, but I would expect that everybody would be negotiating the separate extension. So, that's just kind of where I am. I'm still thinking my way through kind of all of the different reasons why people do multipath, but on this one, it seems like, this is also something where I know something about my end that I want you to know, and that you can't guess. You, the server, can't know that I have this preference. And it seems like it's harder to do, it's hard, not having this will make things harder in the base protocol. This is in the base multipath extension. But that would be my theory. Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer. Tommy Hawley, please.
All right, Tommy Pauly, Apple. So on this, I think you probably could have other implicit ways to tell the server that I don't want to use this path yet by saying, oh, I haven't been actually sending anything from the client on this path. You could do things like that, but that would be relatively complicated. And I think a lot of the cases where we've seen multipath deployed so far, at least in our experience, is when you have very specific applications that are using it, where you have a lot of coordination between the client and the server. But hopefully with multipath Quic, as Quic is more and more ubiquitous on the web, we're just going to start using this to random servers that we don't have that with. So I think having something explicit would be very, very useful here, just to avoid some of the cost cases. The fact that there is something equivalent within MPTCP, I think, is a very strong argument for saying we should have at least parity with it. And I don't think we should necessarily go beyond it. And so I would encourage us to stay minimal and not add a huge bunch of complexity or too much extensibility right now there. Just, use whatever the simplest bit we need to send, but let's do something to at least maintain parity with MPTCP.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, this MP prior option was designed to be extendable and provide more features, but at the end they only specified this one bit in this initial version. So yeah.
Yunfei, please proceed.
Hello, this is Yunfei from Alibaba. I want to add some more information. So actually, in some of our application, we already see users complain that we use too much of the cellular data. So I think the cost is one of the very important factor that ultimately affect user experience. So that's why we think it is actually important for us to have some explicit way to, for example, if we see the data is consumed a lot on one path, and we can explicitly send a signal to set that path as standby. So I actually agree with what Mira just said. I think it's important to have this functionality.
Thank you. Marcus in the room.
Markus Amen, Deutsche Telekom. As you know, Mirja, I already participated in the discussion at GitHub, and I fully support this idea. The only question I have is one bit enough at the end, or do we need more bits? In the multipath DCCP, I will present on Friday during the TSVWG slot. I will present that we spend for an MP prior option 4 bits. So we have multiple levels of prioritization for paths. So maybe that is something that could be also considered here.
Yeah, as I said, there's no PR yet, so we will propose a solution. I hear definite agreement that we want at least this one bit, so let's see where we go. Thank you.
Thanks. And then Hang.
One more person, sorry.
The advanced feature regarding to the scheduling, you basically signal the scheduling preference of your path. It's not a 0-1 decision. It's actually, you can signal how much traffic you want to go to a specific path. So I think it should leave out the base draft. It should be put into another extension draft.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a little bit of a separate, or like, yeah, that's a functionality you might want to use it well at some point, but if it has to be part of the base spec is a different question. Yeah. Let's wait for the PR and then have some more discussion.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Then next issue. Yeah, so this issue is also easy. In RFC 9000, only the clients can migrate, and there are good reasons for it because it makes the whole thing much simpler, and that's also the main use case. However, if I'm right, and I might be wrong, I believe the reasons for having this restriction is not valid for multipath anymore, because in a multipath case, you're not closing the old path. You're just opening a second path. So if the second path fails to some extent, you still have the old one. So I didn't find a good reason to actually keep this restriction. It would be a change to what the base version 1 spec says, and we try to keep those changes minimal. But if we don't have a good reason restricting the multipass functionality in a way that doesn't allow for certain use cases, it doesn't seem to be useful for me. So I wanted to have some feedback if people think this restriction is still useful, or if people are open to actually release that restriction.
We have Mike. We've got a few people joining the queue. So Mike, please go ahead.
So the issue here is not so much that you don't want the server to open new paths as that with NAT, the server opening the new path will usually not be useful if it sends the first packet. So what I had envisioned for server-initiated paths was basically a frame that looks a lot like the server preferred address transport parameter, where the server asks the client, please try to reach me on this IP address. And then the server and the client is the one who sends the first packet to open things up with the NAT. So I think if you want it to work in most situations, you need a little bit more machinery and not just removing the restriction. And you can remove the restriction and it just won't work most of the time.
So yeah, that I totally agree, but I think that would actually be an extension that we kind of didn't consider of the space functionality. And the point is, if the server tries to open a path and you fail, then nothing happened. You just fail in the multipath case because you still have the old path. So yes, in many scenarios it might not be useful, but there might be use cases where it's useful, and it's just like not necessary to have this restriction from my point of view.
Thanks, Mike. Martin, please.
Yes, Martin Seemann, Protocol Labs. I would like to point out that having server-initiated path would be really nice in the peer-to-peer use case, as it makes the protocol more symmetric.
Short and sweet. Eric, Echo.
I guess I would. I mean, I'm sort of not opposed to that necessarily, but like my assumption would be in the peer-to-peer use case, you're using ICE anyway, or something like it, and therefore, like, and therefore the situation is somewhat different. Like, are we ever going to use? Are we ever going to do quick multipath? Like, I mean, is a peer-to-peer case where you like just like randomly probe new paths with Quic rather than with ICE?
I don't know, ICE is for recovering, right? You might still want to open the path for some reason from the server side.
I mean, no, realistically, no. Realistically, like, realistically, you like need ICE to like punch the holes in the NATs and do all kinds of other crap. Like that's why like all the any multipath stuff on like WebRTC lives above ICE.
I mean, so I think in the net, as we discussed, in that case, it's not useful, and that's like a very common case. The cases I have in my head are more like this kind of mask proxy cases where you within like one network and you want to use that.
Right. Again, I'm not opposed to this change. What I'm saying is that I don't believe in the peer-to-peer case it will actually be functional.
Yeah. Okay.
So, hi, Brian Dremel, Google. I basically came up to this, or put myself in the queue to say something very much like what Mike Bishop said. I think what I'm hearing is the right way to do this is to release the restriction, but maybe add some language here that says, by the way, this is only going to work here, and point to future extensions. Because I think the server preferred address thing that Mike was talking about is super useful, and I'd like to see that extension maybe follow very closely on the heels of this. I think and then like releasing this restriction in the initial multipath extension sort of points in that direction, but I think you need to be very explicit about what this is going to get you in the base case, and then point to future work to actually, so like you need the like Ecker says, around the I stuff, and then very excited about Mike's server preferred address. So thanks.
Mike, please go ahead.
I am still in the queue. I'll get down now.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Eric, please.
Details. So I would be fairly hesitant to release this in the multipath extension. I joined the queue just to say that at the time when we were doing client-initiated migration in the original Quic spec, there were an awful lot of fairly thorny problems that we were able to punt on by saying that the server can't do this. And so I think just my initial reaction to this slide was like, oh yeah, sure, like, you know, try to open a new path. It'll be fine. If it doesn't work, nobody's upset. But it might be worth going back and digging up some of those discussions because there were a lot of fairly painful things. And so I think my personal preference would be to keep the restriction here and have a completely separate document that opens that up. Like personally, I think it would be super useful. I'd love to see that for peer-to-peer use cases. But it seems like that would be best as a different document that can then spend lots of time and focus on those issues as opposed to being an afterthought in this document, which has its own issues to deal with.
So this is exactly the point. Like I know we had like a whole lot of discussions, but like my memory wasn't good enough to figure out what we discussed. So I tried to read the draft and figure out what the restriction was. And I think the main restriction was exactly this net use cases and the risk of failure. And I don't think that's a reason to keep it here in multipass. So if there have been more reasons and somebody remembers better what the discussion was, or maybe I have to dig through GitHub or whatever, then we should pick them out and we should discuss them. But I didn't find any other reasons. And if we don't have a good reason, then like I don't want to keep this restriction. But like if you remember better than I do, then just send an email to the list or to me. That would be helpful.
Spencer?
This is Spencer Dawkins. If I was understanding what Eric was suggesting, and I'm asking both Eric and Mirja, would it be possible for this extension draft to be silent about this, and we could have the conversation about what could happen in the base Quic protocol? Is that kind of what Eric was suggesting?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're suggesting.
Yeah, well, I'm also kind of asking your understanding of what, you know, given that input, what would you do next?
Yeah, I think we just need a little bit more discussion and dig into like this old discussion a
Okay.
bit deeper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I hope Eric can help with that.
Yeah, I thank you for presenting this particular issue.
Okay, I think Eric's a hangover from when he joined before. Let's go to Jana now, please. Yes.
I'm waiting. Okay, I think I'm in. So the one thing I might note is that simply removing the restriction doesn't really tell us much about what the problems might be. It's about what you want to do after that. So I would say that if there is a design about what is going to happen, it's going to be a lot more concrete in terms of an analysis of the problems that might happen with a new mechanism that the server uses. I'd say, sure, go ahead, remove the restriction, but let's see what exactly, I mean, whatever it is that we end up doing from the server in terms of initiating new paths and so on and so forth, will make it more interesting for us to understand the interactions with various things. And as Eric was pointing out, there were a lot of little corners which we walked down when we were doing the client-initiated migrations. And it'd be interesting to go down those paths again once we have a mechanism here to speak of.
Yep, I agree. But it sounds like people are interested to actually have that discussion, so that's good.
Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, we have had that discussion a number of times in the authors list and on GitHub, and I really disagree with Mirja on that one. Where I come from is that the multipass option has been designed to be as compatible as possible with the existing Quic v1. And if we do a departure from the Quic v1 restriction, that we only start from the client, that departure has a cascade of implication. An example would be, for example, who validates the pass. Right now, we have the pass validation by saying the server can only use it if the client sends non-pass validating packet on it, on the pass. There are restrictions like that, and I really, really believe that it's better to leave this server-initiated thing to a separate draft that fully discusses it.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, we're disagreeing a little bit here because we do change things in the base spec, right? And we agree to keep it minimal, but if there's no good reason to keep it, then we should remove it. And
there is at least one good reason, Mirya. There's at least one good reason, which is the validation of the pass by the client sending traffic.
Yeah, but I think this is just symmetric in that case, so I don't think it
No, it is not. It is not. It is not symmetric. It is not symmetric. The server must not send data before the client has sent non-validating packets on the pass.
So you're saying even if the server opens the connection, we still need the restriction that first the client needs to send data?
Yeah, and basically, if you don't do that cascade of thing, it doesn't work. I really wish we dropped that issue for now, and we punt it to an explicit extension that does what Mike said, which is Mike Bishop, which is basically to exchange the address, etc., do the full shebang. Don't do this one tiny thing on the side, and don't hide it in the main draft.
Okay, I mean, it's noted. As I said, I think we disagree because I think this is a smaller change than you believe, and maybe you should figure out how big the change actually is to figure out a way forward.
No, it's not. It's the principle. I mean, in principle, we should not do small changes like that.
Okay, let's get Harold in the room to speak. Thanks, Chris.
Harald Avestran, speaking from the WebRTC experience, where we have peer-to-peer, we have client-server, we have different reasons for opening new channels, we have failover. Anything that restricts failover is a pain in the posterior. But this actually is server-initiated channels is a useful tool in more places than multipath. So I think the right way forward is to initiate action on server-initiated channels independently and make sure that you don't block multipath from using it when it's available. So two different things, because it's more useful than just multipath.
Yeah, I think the conclusion is still we leave it open, the issue, but we might down prioritize it. Okay, quick time check.
We have about 10, 15 minutes left.
Okay.
So however you'd like to use that.
What's the next issue? Okay, so I just note this. I don't think we have to discussion right now. This is an open issue we have where there was a proposal to also have some kind of effectively zero RTT behavior for new paths, because currently when you open a new path, you have path validation, so it takes a whole round trip time until you can send data on the new path. And the question was, do we want to make more than that? But I would just like point you at the GitHub issue at this point. There's no PR yet, and we need further discussion there.
We have 3 people in the queue.
Okay.
Please keep it short. Jan May, please.
Hello everyone, this is Jan May from Alibaba. For this issue, we can include some token mechanisms to help endpoints validate the peer's address quickly. And surely this will bring complexity for creating new passes, and we need to consider the security problems very carefully. So at first, we want to make sure that whether people need this or not, because in Quic V1, endpoints must do path validation first before sending non-probe packets during migration. So if people want this, we want to hear your voice here.
Thanks, Brian.
Hi, Brian Trammell, Google. I would just point out that a answer to this question would, I think, cause the previous discussion to collapse into one of its two states. So maybe spending a little bit more time on this, not right now, but revisiting the multipath server restriction removal after there's an answer here, because I think that might actually make the path validation restriction removal on server-initiated paths easier.
Thank you. And Eric.
There we go. I would actually question why we would need this unless there's a concern around sending data on multiple paths within the first round trip of the connection. Because I think the idea was that other than in that case, you should always be able to have a valid path by the time you need to actually send anything on it. And so it would be really good to have kind of a clear picture of what the exact use case is where opening this box is necessary at all.
Yep. Yeah, I think this is maybe an action item for Jan Mai. If you can add more information to the GitHub issue, that would be helpful. Next. Actually, can we take the next one first?
That's okay.
Yeah. So that is a discussion that came up when we tried to clarify how the idle timeout worked. And currently what we're saying is that like you have this max idle timeout parameter and you just use it for all paths. But given the paths might be very different or you might use them in a very different way, it could be useful to actually have different timeouts on different paths. And you might want to actually, you can also just like do that locally and it will not totally break, but it might be useful to actually signal this information to the other end. So discussion so far was basically, we had some people saying, yes, this is helpful because it's more explicit and it makes it easier to close your passes at a valid point of time. And then there was also an argument about, no, this doesn't give you much and it's just too complicated. So more input would be nice at the GitHub issue or a quick comment if you have anything here. I think more discussion is needed at the GitHub issue. So no Q, let's go back to the previous issue.
Okay.
Okay, that's an issue which is actually related to the packet number space question, because that's only an issue that exists if we use single packet number spaces on our paths. So if we decide to use multiple packet number spaces, this issue just goes away. And we also, we have a PR for this, so maybe this is straightforward, but some feedback would be useful. So the problem is if you have a single packet number space and you send an acknowledgement and you provide and you acknowledge packets in the same frame that have been sent or received over different passes, and one of those packets carried an ECN marking, you cannot, as the receiver of the ACK, you cannot distinguish anymore which pass the ECN marking was on, because the ECN feedback in Quic is just like a counter. So the counter increased, but you don't know which pass. So we need to address this issue. It's an open problem. And like what the current text proposes is like 3 things. It's a recommendation for the sender of the acknowledgement to actually separate, if the ECN marking increases, if ECN is used and you see a marking, then try to separate your X. You can always just acknowledge packets of one pass in one egg. That's allowed in Quic. It might increase your egg size quite a bit, but it gives the receiver of the egg the information it needs to figure out where the congestion was. That's just a recommendation. If the sender of the egg doesn't follow this recommendation, and you receive such an egg where it's ambitious, where it's not clear where the congestion happened, you have to assume the most conservative case, which is like the congestion might happen on any path and you should react to it on all paths. That's what the PR says right now. The other option is always to just disable ECN support. So if you received such an acknowledgement, you can decide at this point to disable, or of course you can just like whenever you use single packet number spaces, you just don't use ECN at all. That's like the easiest solution, but would make me sad. actually. So that's the PR, and I don't know, there was a bit of discussion with Christian, I think, but I believe this is mostly ready to merge, if people agree to these recommendations.
Gori just joined the queue.
So Gori doesn't agree or disagree and hasn't read. So the implication is I will read, and I looked at it. I don't like the last option. They don't use ECN or break ECN by just making everything a lowest common denominator. Seems like the wrong way to go at this stage. So
I agree.
Okay, happily read it and happily give comment.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, then let's move to the big issue, actually. One more, yeah. So the big thing that we need to resolve in this group is really, do we want to use single packet number spaces on all paths or use separate packet number spaces on each path? And like we had this discussion already before we adopted the draft, and we kind of in a stage where at the current draft actually describes both options in the hope that people would implement both or at least one of the options, we get some more experience with it. So this is a little bit the analysis about what's the pro and cons. And I quickly will run through it, but then also talk about the PR that we have there right now. And like Christian or anybody of the other authors, feel free to jump in the queue anytime and just add stuff. So from an efficiency point of view, the multiple packet number space solution is more efficient because you can just reuse the existing loss recovery logic and everything is like clear and easy. But effectively, what the implementation experience showed so far is that the single number packet space, if you like do a little bit of additional effort, is like from the performance point of view nearly similar efficient. So that's like not the big point to distinguish things here. Code complexity is something we discussed a lot because initially we thought like having a single number packet space means actually less code changes. While having multiple packet number spaces really adds like a complete new code path, and if you don't use that feature, it might not be used very often, so that was a concern. But to actually have a good performance with a single packet number space solution, you have to be really smart about how to send your packets in order to keep the X size small, in order to have efficient recovery mechanism and so on. And having the smartness in there is additional code, and it's additional logic. And it's probably also additional logic that we don't just want to leave to the implementation, but specify in the draft to some extent, because otherwise people will implement this and just get bad performance and will not like it. So we have to give advice about it, and it's additional code. And so, you know, the big difference here is like the third point, it's the egg handling, where like the multi-packet number space solution, we add a new acknowledgement for, and you can really distinguish which packet was sent and acknowledged on which path. And everything, and ECN information is clear. We don't have the problem that I was just like talking about before. And in the single packet number space solution, you really have to add some logic to make sure that like your X don't increase, because if you have two passes with very different delay, you see holes in your X space, and that can increase the X a lot. So you have to be smart about how you send your packets, how to distribute the packet numbers, and how you create your X. And yeah, so, you know, like, as I said, I think the code complexity is like not the big point here anymore because they are kind of trade-offs. But what's still a big difference is that use of no connection ID on both ends is not supported with multiple packet number spaces effectively. The multiple packet number spaces need some kind of identifier in the packet to figure out where your packet belongs in order to decode it. So you need a connection ID. And that's really the big difference. Next slide. Yeah, so we did discuss a lot about like how you can enable this use cases also for multiple packet number spaces. And there are some ways to actually handle this if you only have like one connection ID in one direction. It might be a little bit fragile or like not easy and some fiddling, but there are possibilities. But like this table mainly just tells you that you at least need, like our conclusion is you at least need one connection ID in one direction with multiple packet number spaces.
I have Brian in the queue.
So thanks a lot for both of these tables, that makes this issue a lot easier to understand. I would say on the previous slide, you'd said that the code complexity is kind of a trade-off. You have to choose one or the other. I would point out that in the single PN space, in order to be performant, you need an entire set of special cases, whereas in the multiple PN space, you just need a new abstraction where you might not have had one, right? Like, so you already have a loss recovery algorithm instance. Maybe you didn't split it out in the right way and we're forcing you to do that. That does seem to be like a very green yellow to me. So I do think that the code complexity on the single PN space that you're trying to do performant seems to me to be a negative on that side than the other one. It's like, so basically, do we want to force people to do more code complexity with respect to like a completely separate code path as opposed to an instance of an existing code path versus the zero-link CID problem?
I mean, I just used 3 colors here.
Right.
But I think like it's what I want to say here, code complexity, it seems like to be like the big argument at the beginning,
Yeah.
but
Right.
it's not.
Okay. Yeah, because okay, good. So I think I'm just restating your point. Thanks. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Martin Thompson.
Yes. Okay. So I think perhaps there's a code complexity piece that you haven't gotten on the multiple PN spaces side here, which is the key schedule. If you're going to be using multiple packet number spaces, you can do separate key derivation for the different spaces. Otherwise, you'll have nonce reuse. So I guess that's probably just another version of the same thing, which is you need multiple instantiations, but it does change the way that you even start using a single path in that case, which is a little awkward.
So if I remember correctly, it was actually a point about, so if you decrypt your packet in a multiple packet number space, you have to use the nonce and the connection ID. So that will actually change your decryption logic, which was like one of the negative points here.
Right. That's all.
Thanks, Martin. Christian.
We have been discussing that for quite some time, and the point that that Miria is making there on additional code is really based on the implementation experience in my implementation. And yes, you do need the additional code if you want to do that. That additional code is actually on a common path. You can use it in the unique path mode. It has the advantage of dealing very well with things like the size of arc in general, and with the issue of out of order delivery in general, because out of order delivery also messes the size of arc. And if you were to see that, you would see that, for example, if the network was doing equal path multipath, it'll be useful as well. So in my implementation, that logic which was added is in the main path. It's not some kind of things crafted on the side. The one thing I would point out in the proposed solution that we have is that...
Yeah, actually, Christian, as you're here, should we just move on 2 slides up and you want to talk about this?
Yes, let's move there. Yeah.
One more. You want to take it, or should I?
Yeah, I can take it. I mean, basically, because I look at the problem and I say, okay, we mostly have an issue with zero-length connection ID. If we were not using zero-length connection ID, we would just use multiple number space. And yes, it's a bit awkward. I mean, we have to do some changes on the interface to the encryption, but that's not too bad. I mean, it's something you do once and it's done. It's easy to test. Now, if you want to support multiple connection IDs, you end up with 2 packs of complexity. You have 1 pack of complexity on the receiver side. I mean, if as a receiver, I decide to say, hey, I am going to receive on a null connection ID, And I am going to also support the server using multipass, using multiple paths. Then by doing that, you're forcing yourself to implement all the ACK logic for multipass. Basically make sure to not sending too many ACKs, making them short, etc. So what I like about that is that it is an optional complexity. An application can choose to either use zero-length connection ID and do the complexity, or not use zero-length connection ID and then don't have the complexity. So that's something which is on the ACK side, which is very well optional. And I think that we have something a bit similar on the server side. I mean, on the side of the node that is not using zero-length connection ID, but speaks to a node that is. In that case, the complexity is on the send pass. I mean, how do you manage multiple links? How do you manage to do that? And in the loss recovery logic mostly. That loss recovery logic only engages when the sender actually sends on multiple paths at the same time. So it's again optional. We can have a sender that basically says, yeah, I mean, I'm going to do multipass. I assume that my peer will have a full-length connection ID. If they don't, I will do a fallback and I'll say, I don't want to buy that complexity. I will just send mostly on one pass. That works. So basically, I think that if we take that approach, we get to a solution where the complexity on either side is optional. If you want to have the feature of zero-length connection ID, you have an additional complexity, but I mean, things are well defined and you don't get the complexity if you don't want that feature. So that's the spirit of the unified proposal. Let's say, make the complexity optional. And if people want to have the benefits of using short connection IDs or null connection IDs, then buy the complexity and get the feature.
Thanks, Christian. We're at time for this session.
Yep.
Altogether. I appreciate we've got some people in the queue, but we're seeing good interest in this topic. So I think we'll need to take it offline and follow up.
Not even take the clue?
Gori, could you be quick? Do you need to respond to anything, or could we just take this offline?
Gori would like to talk more about the ACK situation, but you do it online after the meeting.
Thanks, that's appreciated.
But I would really like to figure out if my co-authors want to add anything.
Jan-May, is there anything briefly you would like to add?
To support the effort for the unified proposal on last page for 3 reasons. First, the solution takes advantage from both single PN space and multiple PN spaces. As for most implementations which use long connection IDs, it could take the best efficiency of AZK ranges with multiple PN space. And for implementations which use non-connection ID, they could support multipass with single PN space. We don't have to worry about choosing from A or B. We just take the best of both. The second point is that for implementations, we just have one single solution for each situation. It surely would reduce complexity. The last point is that we don't have the risk of failure for interrupt tests, and this would probably happen in the previous version if 2 endpoints choose to support different PN space solutions. In the unified version, we don't have this problem because the CID in packet header distinguishes the situations. That's why I strongly support the unified proposal as an individual.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the PR here probably needs some editorial work still. So don't get confused by that. But other than that, I think we have a proposed way forward. And like, if more people want to implement it and provide feedback, that would be very useful.
Cool. Thank you. Right. Thanks, Maria. Next up, we have Robin to talk about Qlog.
Yeah, can you hear?
We can hear you. We're just granting you a slide deck control.
Excellent.
We can see this in the room. Are you okay?
Yeah, that should be fine. All right, morning everyone. Welcome to the Superman update for Qlog. So called because for all three of our existing documents, this last update, we basically went from Clark Kent to Kal-El, meaning that internally they're still pretty much the same person. They have the same superpowers. They just look quite differently on the outside. And that is my way of saying that we did mostly editorial changes in this past update, but of a very specific kind. As you might know, one of the main things that Qlogs does is define different types of events that you can log for the different protocols. So, and the event fields that you need to log and the types of the data that is in those fields. And to define what that should all be, up until now, we had been using a TypeScript-alike dialect, mainly because at the beginning when I started Qlog, I didn't know about any better options. Since last time, we know about something called CDDL, the Concise Data Definition Language, which is a much better fit for this, and also an official IETF standard. So that's basically what this update was. We switched from TypeScript to CDDL. And as you can see from the examples here on top, it's actually relatively trivial. For most things, it's mostly a little bit of syntax that changes. String is now called text, and number is called uint, and the question mark is for an optional field is before the field instead of after. Things like that, right? So it should be relatively simple, even for people not very experienced with CDDL to understand most of the new syntax. However, CDDL does bring us quite a few extra opportunities to make things better. For example, our Qlog events are generally described as very flexible. You can add any new fields if that's needed in your personal implementation, and tools are expected to handle that. Now, in the previous definitions, we kind of indicated that with, as you can see, a comment, right, hoping that people would do the right thing. But in CDDL, there's actually an official syntax for doing that, indicating here that you can have any number of text fields, so key value pairs, where the key is a string, that's the asterisk text, and the value can be then any value that you may want. So that's a much cleaner way of doing this. And CDDL's other interesting options, for example, one of the things that are in the Quic draft is that you can have TLS level alert errors, and they map onto Quic level errors. But we didn't want to make a new text string enum entry for each of them individually. So originally in TypeScript we had like this very non-official syntax for doing that, while with CDDL we can actually use the regex operator and define this a little bit more clearly what type of string we're expecting there for that kind of error. Another thing that we can use is the unwrap operator. So we have quite a few events that actually share quite a few fields. Think about, you know, the difference between a packet sent and a packet received. A packet remains a packet. Previously, we mostly manually copied the fields, and sometimes, you know, if you forget to change or to keep the changes consistent. With CDDL, editorially, it's very simple. You have this unwrap operator, this squiggly line, where you just have the common fields in one part, and then you can just unwrap them at the location that you need them, basically meaning you just copy paste the fields to where you want to reuse them, basically. So that's mostly editorial, but the main thing that I was really happy with CDDL is the ability to be a bit more specific about extension points. CDDL has a feature called sockets or plugs, which are indicated here with the $sign, as you can see, where the idea is that it's kind of like a partial type. So you define the type, so in this case, the protocol event body that's defined partially at one place, and then you can extend the same type with new possible definitions in a different place. And in practice for Qlog, this is very useful because we have what we call the main schema. So that is like the main document describing all the high level stuff. For example, what is a generic event look like, as you can see on top. But then we have sub-documents that describe the different events for, in this case, HP3 and Quic. And you kind of want to properly link up those two definitions across the different documents that we have. And that was very difficult, I found, in TypeScript. There we just, again, had the data for an event was anything. Could even be just a number or a string, not very well typed. Well, here, the approach we're taking now is that you have a very, very clear listing of all the different events in, for example, the HTTP3 document, and then you can say these belong to the protocol event body partial type that is defined in the main schema. And so you can do a proper checking in tooling, for example, as I'll get to soon, if you're actually using these things correctly as they are defined in the specs, right? Those are like the main things. There are a lot of smaller things. For example, we have the size operator, meaning we can be a bit more precise about how large certain fields need to be. That's not super useful for JSON, but let's imagine someone wants to make a binary serialization of QLog down the line. It's good to have these things defined up front. There's also one thing that I'm planning to do. It's not in there yet, but for example, adding some metadata to the events as well. One concrete example is that we have the notion of event importance. So not all events are as important as the others, and you shouldn't be logging all the events all the time because that would be way too much logs. And so we have the concept of core events, most important, then base, and then extra that you can have for debugging purposes. These indications are done in like a prose way in the current drafts, but CDDL will allow us to have this inside of the actual definition as well, which I think would be useful for a variety of reasons. Next to those things, we did a big consistency update of all of this across the different documents. We properly named all the code blocks. We properly split up examples and that kind of stuff to make things a bit more tidy. But so that was like the main thing that we did in this update. And I wanted to get back a little bit to why we did this. First of all, we now have CDDL, which is a IETF standard, is an existing RFC, which is better than having not an RFC. But in my mind, much more importantly, is this will help us with having some automated tooling, some powerful automated tooling down the line. What we did for these drafts is already have some basic tools that basically extract the CDDL from the markdown documents and combine them into a single CDDL file, which we can then validate using existing CDDL tooling to make sure that we haven't forgotten anything or that our type inferences are consistent and that kind of stuff. And then we've also been using this to generate dummy JSON files so that we can actually check, is our QLog, is our CDDL definition actually correct? Is it representing what we want it to represent? So that's what we have. And then we hope to go for even more complex things, which are here in red, which is, for example, generating other representations of the same schema. So, for example, let's say you have you want to implement a QLog library, and for some reason you want to have each of the events as a separate class or a separate struct. Right now, you would have to do that manually, which again is annoying to keep things consistent. With this, you might be able to generate this automatically down the line. Another very useful use case is automatically validation of actual QLog JSON files. So I imagine that you just upload a QLog to, for example, QVis, and then it can tell you, okay, this field is actually required, and you're not logging it, or you you have a typo in this kind of field, which we've seen happen in the wild a couple of times. All of these things I think will be useful, not as much for existing implementations, but especially for newer ones or the ones that still need to update to the newer versions. But especially as we look to extend QLog beyond what we have now. Again, we're still not sure if we're going to log for TCP or anything, but I think at least I have concrete plans to start working on some QLog things for web transport, for mask, for multipath down the line. And I think having this kind of proper tooling and validation in place will make that process a lot easier for everyone trying to implement this down the line, right? So that's what we did, why we did it. Now, what we want to do by next IETF is mostly more editorial stuff. So a lot of the prose was written during drafts 23, 24. And so a lot of things has been updated since. A good example of that is the Quic drafts, right, where we have renamed HTTP headers to HTTP fields, which are of course carried in the new HTTP3 fields frame, right? And some other prose updates. Another thing that we plan to do is adding a couple additional events and fields that we don't have now, things that allow you to log on which CPU or thread, for example, things were happening. But especially also, again, for Quic, we currently have very obtuse events, I think, that could be a bit more high level, a bit more usable for people, because I don't think anyone has ever actually implemented the current Quic events, which I think is a clear indicator they're kind of missing their goal. So we really want to get on that for the next step. Most of these I think we can do ourselves, but especially for Quic, I don't think we have the necessary expertise within the editors. And so we are looking for, as you can see on the right, our own Lois Lane, or maybe in this case a Louis Lane, to come help us out with that. I created an issue for that, number 199, if you're interested. So that's things we can mostly do ourselves and think we have a grasp on, but there are a couple of open issues that I wanted to bring here now that will need to be resolved before we move to RFC, of course. One of the ideas is split up the main schema even further to remove especially operational concerns there. For example, we have an environment variable that you should set as a implementation where the qlog should end up. We also have a well-known endpoint that nobody's actually using at the time, so maybe we shouldn't even have that. So the question is, do we keep that in the main, or do we even need to specify that at all, right? Then there are a lot of discussions about versioning and extensibility. We have clearly said that we will not take this into too much account, right? Not try to already estimate how things would work for TCP and stuff down the line, but we still need to have a few extension points, an idea how to handle different versions of the main schema versus versions of the protocol events and that kind of stuff. We have a couple of I think proposals, not for everything, but something. So people with an interest in that might look at these issues there as well. But the main thing for me, which I keep bringing up, I think, in every qlog talk I did, and I still haven't had anyone really give much feedback on this, is around security and privacy, right? How do we handle that within qlog? The more I try to find about this, the more it's I think, or at least I'm a very bad searcher, it appears that this is an unsolved problem, or at least an unspecified or unstandardized problem, that most companies just do what makes sense for them internally, and they do it in an ad hoc fashion. And there are no existing documents that you can refer to as you should follow these specific guidelines. And if that is indeed the case, then I wonder if this is something we should be doing in qlog, because it seems like a very big undertaking, a very important undertaking as well, but something that would very much delay qlog itself, right? So either I'm looking for people to tell us these are the best practice documents that you can refer to, or people to tell us what is like the, I wouldn't say the absolute minimum that we have to do to make this good with qlog, to make it appropriate, but at least give us a way forward in what should be specified in qlog before we can get to RFC. So that we can start working on this as soon as possible. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robin. You know, just as an independent perspective, the CDDL work was good, and those PRs, if anyone didn't see, were quite big. So the efforts are appreciated, and that does really unblock us on progressing these other issues that are both big and small. But I think if people would like to contribute, it would be really appreciated. It might be just something simple to bite off and knock off. We've got a few people in the queue. Brian first. I'm going to close the queue just so that we can keep the pace going. But
so yeah, TLD or Robin, let's schedule a little bit of time offline to talk about the security and privacy stuff. I'm willing to help on that. I think you've properly identified that this is a gigantic can of worms. We semi-tackled some of these things in the IPFix and PSAMP working groups about 10 to 15 years ago. So there might be some prior art there that we can draw from, but let's follow up on that offline.
Thanks, Brian. Eric?
Kicking in. All right. Yeah, I would say for the security and privacy side of things, I would advocate for per field indicators in addition to whatever other guide we're going to give. Like big plus one, let's chat with Brian and figure out how we tackle the kind of high level concepts. But something that we found internally for a variety of things that get spit out by different implementations of various things, at least within Apple platforms, is that it is extremely helpful to have kind of a very local indication of, hey, you're in the middle of writing some random code somewhere, and you may not be thinking about the fact that somebody could use this to derive or understand X piece of information that could be considered private. So yes, please, let's have some high-level guidance somewhere, but I think having something that is in this document, not somewhere else, for potentially each field of, hey, we've thought of some random thing that you could combine this field with this other one and understand something about a person that you might not want or that they might not have been thinking of at the time when this was getting logged, would probably be very helpful for people, even if to say, oh, hey, you should go read this other high-level guidance somewhere else.
And would that be simply like, this is a sensitive field, or this is a sensitive field, and this is how you should encode it if you want to be privacy sensitive?
Yeah, probably something along those lines of even just a single field of like, this is a totally fine field, spit this out as much as you want, separate from like, hey, by the way, this is your, like, one of your main TLS keys. You probably shouldn't be logging this.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Jana?
I think I'm in. Yeah, I'll agree with what Eric said. I came up here to say that per field indicators are very useful. However, I'm also going to caution against going too deep down that rabbit hole. There's a lot of local semantics attached to what data means what. There's value in indicating levels of sensitivity of various bits of data, protocol information, because as Eric was pointing out, oftentimes the consumers of this information don't necessarily understand how pieces of information can be put together with other pieces of information. But at the same time, because you don't have global view of how exactly these traces are being used. Are they being used in a client side, a single, are they being used in tandem with other logs that are also existing? You just don't know the scope of the total storage that we're talking about, the total view that we're talking about. It becomes tricky. So I'll say that these should be considerations, not rules, and that's appropriate. I think it's definitely very useful to have per field indicators, but just be careful about losing yourself in there. It's not about making it perfect. It's about giving much more information than what they would have without these indicators.
Thanks. So with that, Robin, thank you very much and goodbye. And we'll go on to the last presentation of the day from Nico. We can see your slides, but we can't see or hear you. Nicholas, are you speaking? We cannot hear you, Nicholas. Gori, could you maybe help support?
Yeah, how about I?
I'll see if Nicholas can resolve his issues while you're leading.
Hi, I'm going to move the mic. Hi, I'm Gori. I'm not Nicholas, so if Nicholas comes online, he will carry on. But I'm one of the people who worked on this along with Christian and Tom, so and Stefan from Orange. So let's talk about what this is about. Next draft, please. Next slide.
Oh, Nicholas is in control. Yes, there we go.
Go for it. Oh, and we still have no audio? Okay. Right, okay. So the premise is that there are two pieces to this puzzle. One of them is about remembering some of the transport parameters from a previous connection and using this to somehow initialize a new connection. And we've been doing this with TCP in one way or another for a while. Quic's different to TCP. Quic's probably better to TCP. So can we do this explicitly? Is it possible to implement a way of caching and reusing the parameters and perhaps specify a bit of logic around it? So Christian very helpfully implemented some of this in Quic. You can go to the URL and download this and use it. And we have been using it and testing it. So the method does work. We chose one use case because Nicholas has a lot of experience with SATCOM, and we got some real SATCOM links, some simulated SATCOM links, and we evaluated how this might help when you have a path that has a very large delay and perhaps a lot of bandwidth, but you don't initially know whether to use it. So you do this usual slow start thing, and it goes very slowly, and you do this new thing, and it can go very quickly, which is what Quic should do. They would say more about this data. It's not my data. The thing is, there's a link at the bottom, so you can look at what the data looks like and look at the experiments that were done and read the BDP extension draft, which is one of two drafts we've now factored out. So after talking about this for a few times at the IETF, we're coming here with a bit more solidarity. And what we're saying is we think this is actually two problem spaces. What frames you might need in Quic to actually do this? What are the rules and guidance for doing this when you have that information? Or maybe you take a different approach, but you still do the same thing. So the first thing is, why are we doing this? Why can't we just say, well, go whatever you like? Well, of course, we care about safety, and we care that the network conditions might not be what you expect. So most of the time, they're going to be exactly what you expect, exactly what you saw last time. But if the IP address isn't the same, maybe that's an indication you're not talking to the same endpoint. If the RTT is significantly different, that's a really good indication that your path characteristic isn't the same, and you shouldn't be using the same congestion control parameters you were last time. And of course, what does the same mean? If you measured it a year ago and you measure it now, obviously it's stupid. If you measured it a week ago, a day ago, an hour ago, what's the lifetime of this information? Well, we don't have an answer to that one, by the way, but we think we should have. The other thing is, whatever you measure, even in good faith, you might have had the whole of the capacity available when you last did it. Someone else might have come in afterwards, and you now don't have that full capacity available. How do you prevent stamping on top of them and starving out new connections? Well, it turns out that the overestimation you might get in using standard congestion control and the starvation things probably could be avoided in most cases by not jumping to the full capacity. You jump to a little bit, be more conservative, and importantly, you get really out of that congestion when you see it. Maybe this is actually a reasonable way to operate. Maybe it's not far from things we've heard in TCPM recently with High Start++. Is there a problem with malicious clients? Could you have a client that actually just uses this information to try and blow up the path and make things worse for people? Well, we looked at this and we don't think that's a particular issue. Look at the draft. So we have draft, quick, careful, resume. The idea is that we carefully, 1 minute, one slide, what?
1 minute.
Yeah, okay. It's about carefully resuming. I have talked about carefully resuming, and it's got safety guidelines in the next slide.
Nicholas?
Nicholas, next. Oh, options to remember parameters. There's different ways to do this. Otherwise, we won't be talking about it. And we'd like to see this widely implemented by other people, because that's what Quic's about. Different implementations working together. And we'd like to suggest one of these as being the recommended way to do it. Let's go for the next slide. Next slide, Nicholas. These are the areas where you might get benefit. And is there any interest? Can we make this a working group item? Can we make one of the working group items? Will people actually help us make these into RFCs?
And that is the important question here. So we've had this topic on the as time permits bucket of Quic, and we've always run out of time for the last few sessions, at least anyway. It would be really good to get an indication if people think this is something of interest to the working group. Maybe the specific shape of it needs to be slightly different, but these folks have been working on things, and I think you're looking for an indication. Should you continue working on it or switch tracks to something else? So I think we're at time. We probably can't have that chat right now, but it'd be really helpful if the group here and remote and on the list could give us an indication, yes, no, rather than just crickets, because we'll have to read that and interpret that in some way. So
thank you. Please get in touch.
With that, we're at time. We're going to get booted off in a minute. I neglected to mention at the start of the session, we have Quic and HGB3 stickers at the front desk. Please come and get some, because I have hundreds of them in my bag, and I don't want to take them all home. But if you have friends or colleagues or whomever might have contributed or are interested, please take some back with them too. And again, thank you all very much for your time and patience. Can you mute this thing? Can we mute this thing?
Oh, yeah.
No big deal.